We all need to hear stories of transformation living through a time like this. Stories that display the power there is in acts of kindness with courage. There have been plenty in the news these past 12 weeks. Captain Tom is in good company. It may have been something more personal for you, a family member working on the front line in the NHS, a friend on the checkout in a supermarket, a relative in a care home, or a teacher in one of the school hubs for the children of key workers. I would encourage you to capture those stories while they're still fresh in your memory. Write them down, or maybe there are some favourite images or photographs. Try to reflect on some of the thoughts and feelings that may have raced through your mind and as those events unfolded. It's not simply good therapy. It could open up a rich seam of wisdom on life, or a doorway to rediscovering what things truly matter in this world. Well, for the same reason, I want also this morning to warmly commend to you that you might read the Book of Ruth, tucked away in the first third of the Bible. The story has it all: kindness, courage, friendship, and hope. And what makes this book so accessible is that all the heroic figures in the Book of Ruth are very ordinary people. There are no battles for valiant soldiers to fight, no kings defending their throne, no politicians vying for power, no super talented people breaking records. Yet the Book of Ruth is a masterclass in how to display courageous kindness. All the main characters excel in this, and not because life has treated them particularly well and they can afford to be generous. They have known desperate times, and they've experienced unbearable loss. Now, if you've not read this story before, I'll try not to spoil it for you. The verses Sir John read from chapter 1 describe the main character, Naomi, at the very lowest moment in her life. She's returning to her hometown after 10 years in a foreign land where her husband and both her sons have died. Now, in the culture of the time, Naomi has no choice but to return to her homeland, a destitute widow, completely broken by life. Her sons had married foreign women who, by custom and in law, have no responsibility for Naomi, and yet they display great kindness in deciding that they will leave the safety of their extended families and go with her into a perilous future. On the journey, Naomi realizes they are sacrificing everything for her, that there is very little hope of them ever finding husbands in Israel. After all, they were Moabites. They were enemies of Israel at that time. So she pleads for them to return to their families. One of them finally accepts that it's the sensible thing to do. The other refuses to turn back. Her name is Ruth. Ruth now speaks for the very first time in this story, and her words are among the most moving in Scripture, not just for their poetic beauty, but her extraordinary courage and kindness. "Don't urge me to leave you," she tells Naomi, "or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." With radical self-sacrifice, Ruth abandons every base of security that any person, let alone a poor widow in that context, would have clung to. Her native homeland, her own people, even to her own gods. And Ruth abandons it all to stay by Naomi's side and to take refuge in Naomi's God. In one sense, it doesn't change anything. Naomi is still penniless, returning home with a bitterness so deep that people barely recognize her. Yet, on another level, from this moment on, everything changes. Ruth's courageous kindness seems to set off a chain of events that result in more acts of kindness and in God's blessing flowing through it all. In the closing episode of the story, Naomi is no longer broken and bitter. She has now found hope. Hope above all in the form of a grandson that she now cradles on her knees. This is the child born to Ruth after her marriage to Boaz, a local farmer whose own kindness sets him apart. And notice this in particular. He publicly stands against the racial slur cast on Ruth and gives her life dignity in the eyes of others. And God, again, is at work through it all, weaving these things into his eternal purposes. Today's service, with its special focus on celebrating the NHS and in particular the nursing profession, points us to the lives of countless thousands across this county who, over the years, have served with steady resolve and steadfast kindness, caring for the sick and the dying, including Nottinghamshire's own Ethel Bedford Fenwick. Once again, these past weeks, our nation has recognized the values these people exemplify. It is not simply their professionalism and fine training that makes them stand out, but the inspiration of their courage and their kindness. Like Ruth, they have been bright shafts of light breaking through the darkness of this time. In another story of courage overcoming the darkness, Tolkien puts these words on Gandalf's lips. Some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that is not what I have found. It is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love. None of us can know what difference our kindness may mean to someone else and what good it may bring about. The Book of Ruth reminds us that we can leave the outcome with God. For Ruth and Naomi, God's purpose was far grander than anything they could have imagined. There is a clue to this tucked away in part of the story read this morning. The narrator tells us that Naomi arrives home to a place called Bethlehem, just as the barley harvest was beginning. The grandchild on her knees at the close will be great-grandfather to King David, who himself receives from God the promise that one of his descendants will reign forever. This is Jesus, the one who put on a never-to-be-forgotten masterclass of courage, kindness, and self-sacrifice to fill empty people with hope all across the world. Ruth could not have known that her kindness would one day lead all the way to the cross. Now, today, living in a time that's marked by tension and fear, with deep uncertainty about the future for jobs and for our economy and in education, each one of us can play our part in a story that we can be proud to tell our grandchildren and to be told to their grandchildren. Our small, everyday acts of kindness, by the grace and power of God, can continue to hold evil in check and to be a sign of hope in our broken world. But like Ruth and Naomi, we can start by crying out to God, above all for his help, for his protection, and for his inspiration now and in the days to come. And so I close with words from Psalm 62. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. Amen.